Imagine waking up one morning and the sun simply isn't there. Not hidden behind clouds, not blocked by an eclipse, but genuinely gone, replaced by a dull, copper-colored smudge that barely lights the world around you. For 18 months, that was reality for every human being on Earth. The year was 536 AD, and something catastrophic had just happened to the sky. Medieval historian Procopius wrote from Rome that the sun gave no more light than the moon for an entire year. He wasn't exaggerating. Tree ring data from around the world confirms that 536 was the coldest year in the last 2,000 years. Temperatures across Europe and Asia dropped by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius, which might not sound dramatic until you realize what that means for agriculture. 2.5 degrees is the difference between a harvest and a famine. And famine is exactly what followed. Across the northern hemisphere, growing seasons shortened by weeks. Frost appeared in months that should have been warm. Livestock starved alongside the people who depended on them. But what caused this catastrophe? For centuries, nobody knew. Historians debated everything from asteroid impacts to massive forest fires. Some even suggested a comet passing dangerously close to Earth. The truth, uncovered only in recent decades through ice core analysis, is both simpler and more terrifying. A volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or possibly in El Salvador, hurled so much sulfur and ash into the stratosphere that it literally dimmed the sun across the entire planet. The particles formed a veil so thick that sunlight couldn't penetrate properly for over a year. It was as though someone had drawn a curtain across the heavens and forgotten to open it again. Now, to understand why this mattered so much, you need to understand the world of 536 AD. This was not some empty, primitive planet. The Roman Empire had only recently fallen in the West, and the Eastern Roman Empire under Emperor Justinian was at the height of its power in Constantinople. The Gupta Empire had recently flourished in India. China was divided between northern and southern dynasties, but was culturally sophisticated. Civilizations stretched across every continent, and all of them depended on one thing: predictable seasons. When the sun dimmed, crops failed immediately. In China, records describe snow falling in August. In Ireland, chronicles mention bread failures from 536 to 539, 3 consecutive years of insufficient harvests. Across Scandinavia, archaeological evidence shows that nearly half of all settlements were abandoned during this period. People simply couldn't grow food, and they left. Entire villages vanished overnight. Homes, tools, and personal belongings were left behind as families fled south in desperate search of warmth and sustenance. The Scandinavian impact is particularly fascinating because some researchers believe it gave birth to the myth of Fimbulwinter, the great winter from Norse mythology that precedes the end of the world, Ragnarök. Think about that for a moment. The volcanic winter of 536 may have been so traumatic that it became embedded in an entire civilization's apocalypse myth, passed down orally for centuries before being written in the Eddas. When Viking poets spoke of a winter that swallowed the sun and brought wolves howling from the mountains, they may have been echoing the real memories of their ancestors who lived through exactly that. But the darkness was only the beginning. What followed was arguably worse. In 541 AD, just 5 years after the sky cleared, the Plague of Justinian arrived. This was bubonic plague, the same disease that would return as the Black Death 800 years later. It struck Constantinople first, killing an estimated 5,000 people per day at its peak. Bodies piled in the streets faster than they could be buried. Emperor Justinian himself caught the plague, though he survived. Across the Mediterranean world, the plague killed somewhere between 25 and 50 million people. Now here's the connection that makes this story truly remarkable. Modern researchers believe the volcanic winter of 536 weakened populations so severely through years of famine and malnutrition that when the plague arrived, immune systems couldn't fight it. The eruption didn't just block the sun. It set up a chain of cascading disasters that reshaped the entire world. Malnourished bodies became perfect hosts for the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Years of weakened harvests meant grain stores were depleted, so even those who survived the plague had little food to recover with. Justinian's dream of reunifying the Roman Empire collapsed. He had been reconquering former Western Roman territories with brilliant generals like Belisarius, but the combination of volcanic winter, famine, and plague drained his treasury and killed his soldiers. The territories he'd won couldn't be held. The Mediterranean world fractured permanently, and some historians argue this is the true beginning of the medieval period, not the fall of Rome in 476, but the catastrophe of 536. In the Arabian Peninsula, the disruption had different consequences entirely. The collapse of established trade routes and the weakening of both the Byzantine and Sassanid Persian empires created a power vacuum. Within a century, Islam would emerge from this exact region and rapidly expand into the territories weakened by decades of climate disaster and plague. Without 536, the geopolitical landscape that enabled that expansion might never have existed. Meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, the ancient city of Teotihuacan, one of the largest cities in the world at that time, with a population of over 100,000, experienced severe disruption during this same period. While researchers debate the exact connection, the city entered a period of decline and was eventually burned and abandoned. Across the Pacific, evidence from Southeast Asian tree rings confirms the same dramatic cooling. Even in distant Peru, ice cores from the Quelcaya Glacier show anomalies matching the same time frame, proving this was truly a planet-wide event. This was, in every measurable sense, a global catastrophe triggered by a single geological event. The science of how we discovered all this is almost as fascinating as the event itself. In the 1990s, researchers drilling ice cores in Greenland and Antarctica found distinct sulfate layers corresponding to 536 AD. These layers told them that massive amounts of volcanic material had been injected into the atmosphere. But identifying the specific volcano proved much harder. It was like finding a fingerprint at a crime scene but having no suspect database to match it against. In 2015, a team led by Michael Sigel analyzed ultra-precise ice core data and concluded that there were actually two major eruptions, one in 536 and another in 540. The double punch explains why the climate took so long to recover. Just as the world was beginning to warm again, a second eruption knocked temperatures back down. It was as if nature had delivered a 1-to-2 combination that civilization simply couldn't dodge. The leading candidates for the 536 eruption are a volcano in Iceland and the Ilopango caldera in El Salvador. Ilopango has gained significant support in recent years. In 2019, researchers found evidence of a massive eruption there that displaced tens of thousands of Maya people and deposited ash across Central America. The eruption was powerful enough, they argued, to inject sulfate particles into the stratosphere where winds would carry them globally. If Ilopango was indeed the culprit, it adds another layer to the story. A volcano in Central America could have triggered the beginning of the European Dark Ages. The interconnectedness of Earth's climate systems means that a single explosion anywhere can reshape civilizations everywhere. What makes 536 especially relevant today is what it teaches us about vulnerability. We tend to think of our modern world as resilient, protected by technology and global supply chains. But consider this: a volcanic eruption equivalent to 536 happening tomorrow would ground global air traffic for months, disrupt satellite communications, devastate agriculture across multiple continents, and trigger supply chain failures that would make recent disruptions look trivial. Global food production relies on a remarkably narrow band of climate conditions, and modern just-in-time supply chains have far less buffer than most people realize. We know exactly which volcanoes could produce such an eruption: Yellowstone in the United States, Campi Flegrei in Italy, and several Indonesian volcanoes are all capable of eruptions on this scale or larger. The question isn't whether it will happen again, it's when. Geologists estimate that eruptions capable of causing significant global cooling occur roughly once every 500 to 1,000 years. We're statistically overdue. The people of 536 had no warning and no understanding of what was happening to them. Procopius described the dimmed sun with bewilderment. Chinese chroniclers recorded the unseasonal snow as an omen. Scandinavian communities simply packed up and walked away from farms their families had worked for generations. Nobody knew that tiny particles of sulfur 40 kilometers above their heads were stealing their sunlight. We have advantages they didn't. We have satellite monitoring of every active volcano on Earth. We have climate models that can predict the agricultural impact of a major eruption within days of it occurring. We have global food reserves, though they're smaller than most people assume. Whether those advantages would be enough is an open and uncomfortable question. The story of 536 is ultimately about how fragile civilization really is. Not fragile in the sense that it breaks easily, because humans are remarkably adaptable. The people of 536 survived. They rebuilt. They adapted their myths and their cultures to incorporate the trauma. But fragile in the sense that a single event, one volcano on one day, can redirect the course of history for centuries. The Roman Empire's last chance at reunification died in the ash-dimmed skies of the 6th century. Norse mythology was born from the memory of an endless winter. The geopolitical map of the Middle East was redrawn by famine and plague. All because somewhere on this planet, a mountain exploded and filled the sky with dust. Next time you look up at a clear blue sky and feel the warm sun on your face, remember that none of that is guaranteed. The ground beneath our feet is restless, and it always has been. The volcano that erased a year from history is a reminder that the most powerful forces shaping human civilization aren't kings or armies or ideologies. Sometimes, it's just geology.